picture this. You're on a plane, ready for touchdown in the Canary Islands. Beautiful vacation, right?
Sounds nice.
But instead of, that smooth landing, you're diverted to a crowded airport. And get this, it's shrouded in thick fog.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, not exactly the welcome you're hoping for, right?
Yeah, not at all.
This is the backdrop for our deep dive today, the Tenerife airport disaster. We'll be using a detailed account of the events in a Wikipedia article to kind of piece together this, this really complex story.
It's one of those events that just grabs you, right? Because it wasn't like one big mistake. You know what I mean? It was this series of small things, decisions that just lined up in the worst way imaginable.
Tragically aligned, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like dominoes falling one after another. So let's set the stage. It's March 27, 1977. Two Boeing 747s, Pan Am Flight 1736 and KLM Flight 4805. They're headed for Gran Canaria Airport when a bomb threat just throws everything into chaos.
And, it's bomb threat. It wasn't some random thing either. The Canary Islands were, they were kind of a hotbed of political unrest back then. There was this group, the MPAIA, they called themselves, the Movement for the Self-Determination and Independence of the Canarian Archipelago.
Right.
They wanted independence sometimes through, violence. So their bomb threat, it shuts down Gran Canaria Airport, and all these flights get diverted to this smaller airport, Los Radios, on Tenerife.
So Tenerife becomes this unexpected bottleneck with all these planes, including these two massive 747s trying to land at the same time. What was that like for the airport operations?
Imagine this tiny regional airport suddenly flooded with these huge jets. It wasn't built for that. It was planes everywhere parked on taxiways even. Those are like the roads planes use to get around the airport.
Right.
This congestion meant departing flights had to taxi on the runway itself to get into position for takeoff. Back taxiing, they call it.
Taxiing on a runway.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds risky to me, even under the best conditions.
Yeah.
And then you add the fog that Los Rodeos was known for, and things get really tense.
You got it. The airport's location near a volcano and its higher elevation compared to the coast made it prone to rapid weather changes. Like clear skies 1 minute and then bam, thick fog the next. And on that day, well, that's exactly what happened. Dense fog rolled in and visibility dropped to just a few meters.
Oh, wow. Setting the stage for disaster.
It.
And to make matters worse, KLM Flight 4805 decides to refuel at Tenerife, delaying their departure even further.
Yeah, that decision, it made sense at the time. You want to have enough fuel. But it added weight to the plane and, more importantly, time pressure on the crew. Meanwhile, the passengers on Pan Am 1736, they're stuck on board, can't even stretch their legs because the terminal's packed.
So we've got two 747s stuck on a crowded airport, one about to back taxi on a fogged-in runway, and both crews under pressure to get going. What could possibly go wrong?
Welcome back. Picking up where we left off, it's just mind-blowing how everything came together to create this recipe for disaster.
It really shows how connected all these events are and how decisions that seem small can have huge consequences. All right, so last we left off, KLM Flight 4805 is getting ready to back taxi on the runway with Pan Am 1736 waiting behind them. This is where things start to really go wrong, right?
Yeah, this is it. The runway socked in with fog and becomes this stage for miscommunication and mistakes. Imagine you're a pilot trying to navigate in that pea soup, relying only on what you hear on the radio and a simple airport map. It's intense even for the most experienced pilots.
And to add to that, both crews were working with limited information, which just makes the confusion worse. So let's talk about those miscommunications. What happened first?
Well, after refueling, KLM gets clearance to back taxi down the runway all the way to the end so they can turn around for takeoff. Pan Am's following behind, and they're told to exit the runway at the third taxiway. But here's where a tiny mistake turns into a huge problem. Pan Am misses their exit and keeps going towards the fourth.
Missing an exit in thick fog, I can see how that could happen. But how did that missed exit contribute to the collision?
Well, it put Pan Am right in the path of KLM, who is at the other end of the runway getting ready for takeoff. And as if things weren't bad enough, the fog starts messing with the radios too.
So even talking to each other becomes difficult in these conditions. What were the specific miscommunications between the pilots and air traffic control?
So KLM requests takeoff clearance, but the controller's response is kind of vague. He says the word takeoff, but he's really just giving them route clearance. At the same time, Pan Am tries to tell the controller they're still on the runway, but their message gets garbled with interference, probably from KLM transmitting at the same time.
Wow, so a critical message gets lost in the fog, literally and figuratively.
Yeah.
How did KLM understand the controller's response then?
They only heard the first part, the word takeoff, and thought they were good to go. The controller's next instruction to stand by for takeoff got drowned out by the interference.
The classic case of misinterpreting a partial message. Did the pilots question the clearance at all, especially given the unusual circumstances?
There's evidence that KLM's first officer asked, "Is he not clear that Pan American is still on the runway?" But the captain, Jacob Van Zanten, he was a very experienced pilot for KLM. He seemed sure of himself and went ahead with takeoff.
It makes you think about the dynamics in the cockpit.
Hmm.
Did the first officer feel comfortable challenging the captain's judgment?
That's where crew resource management, or CRM, comes in. Back then, the cockpit was a much more hierarchical place. Junior crew members might have been hesitant to strongly disagree with a senior captain, even if they had concerns. This accident really showed the need for a more collaborative approach where everyone feels like they can speak up and share information.
So it wasn't just about individual errors, but also about the system and how it affected decisions in a high-pressure situation. So as KLM started their takeoff roll, did they know Pan Am was still on the runway?
Not at first. The fog was blocking their view, but then just as KLM's picking up speed, there's this brief break in the fog, and the Pan Am crew, they see this KLM 747 barreling towards them.
I can't even imagine what was going through their minds. What happened next? Did they try to avoid the crash?
Yeah, Pan Am tried desperately to swerve off the runway while KLM tried to climb, but it was too late. KLM was going way too fast, and it smashed into Pan Am, ripping through the upper deck.
A truly horrifying scene. What did the investigation find out about those final moments?
The cockpit voice recorder, which captures audio inside the cockpit, it revealed just how much panic and chaos there was as both crews realized the collision was unavoidable. You can hear KLM's captain shouting, "Pull up! Pull up!" It's chilling to hear. It reminds you of the human cost of this tragedy.
That must have been devastating for the first responders. What was the immediate aftermath?
The impact was catastrophic. KLM's plane was airborne for a moment, but then crashed and exploded, killing all 248 passengers and crew on board Pan Am 1736, though badly damaged, managed to stop. Tragically, only 61 out of the 396 people on board survived, many by jumping out of the burning wreckage.
The scale of it is just hard to grasp. The fog, which played such a huge part in causing this accident, also made rescue efforts harder, right?
Yeah. It took time for emergency crews to reach the crash site. The thick smoke and fire made it incredibly dangerous.
A heartbreaking ending to this part of the story. In the next part, we'll shift our focus to the investigation, the lessons they learned, and how this disaster changed aviation safety for the better. It's hard to believe we've spent 2 parts already, dissecting this disaster. The Tenerife airport disaster, which took the lives of 583 people. It's heavy stuff, but important to talk about. I guess I'm wondering what came out of the wreckage, so to speak. What happened after the initial chaos?
Well, the amazing thing is this horrific event actually led to a huge overhaul of aviation safety. It's like a turning point, It forced the industry to really look at its weaknesses.
That's good to hear, at least. It sounds like Tenerife wasn't just a tragedy, but like a wake-up call. Where do they even start trying to fix such a complex series of failures?
The investigation was massive. Spanish, Dutch, and American authorities all involved. They analyzed the wreckage, the black boxes, the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder. They interviewed survivors and witnesses. Their findings led to changes in so many areas.
Let's talk about those changes. What were some of the biggest improvements they made?
One of the most important was standardizing communication protocols. Remember those unclear radio transmissions we talked about? The ones that played such a big role in the disaster?
Yeah, like KLM's non-standard phrase, "We are now at takeoff," and the controller just saying, "Okay." It's
Look.
crazy how little things like that with language could have such devastating consequences.
Absolutely. So the International Civil Aviation Organization, or ICO, they took charge and developed standard phrases for air traffic control communications. These phrases are designed to be super clear, no room for misunderstanding.
So, like a universal language for pilots and controllers to minimize the risk of those deadly misunderstandings we discussed earlier. What other steps did they take?
They focused on improving how things work in the cockpit through what we now call crew resource management, or CRM. Remember how we talked about the first officer maybe being hesitant to question the captain?
Right, that power dynamic that can sometimes prevent crucial communication, even when lives are at stake.
Exactly. CRM training aims to break down that hierarchy and create a more open and collaborative environment in the cockpit. It empowers all crew members, no matter their rank, to speak up, share concerns, and challenge each other when necessary.
Moving away from just following orders to a more team-based approach where safety is everyone's responsibility.
Exactly. CRM is all about teamwork, shared awareness of the situation, and being able to disagree constructively to prevent errors. It's become a cornerstone of aviation safety, and it's even being used in other high-risk industries like healthcare and nuclear power.
It's amazing how the lessons learned from this aviation tragedy are helping to improve safety in other fields, too. What about technology? Did the investigation uncover any areas where technology could have prevented the disaster?
Well, you'll remember we talked about how Los Rios Airport didn't have ground radar, which could given controllers a real-time view of where planes were on the runway, even in the fog.
Right, I remember thinking, how could such a big airport not have that basic safety feature?
Well, after Tenerife airports around the world invested heavily in upgrading their ground radar systems, this tech gives air traffic controllers a much clearer picture of what's happening, especially in low visibility.
Like giving them X-ray vision to see through the fog and prevent potential collisions on the runway.
Precisely, ground radar makes a huge difference in situational awareness and reduces the reliance on voice communication, which, as we've seen, can be unreliable, especially under stress.
We've covered communication, cockpit culture, and technology. Were there any other changes made after Tenerife?
Airport design got a lot of attention too. Remember how the single runway and the limited taxiway space at Los Rios contributed to the congestion and ultimately the collision?
Yeah, it was like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. The airport just wasn't built to handle that much traffic, especially in those conditions.
Exactly. A lot of airports, especially busy ones, underwent major redesigns. They added more runways, expanded taxiways, improved lighting and signage, all to make things safer and more efficient.
It's incredible how this one event, as terrible as it was, led to so many changes across the entire aviation industry.
It really shows how committed the industry is to learning from its mistakes and preventing future tragedies. The Tenerife airport disaster is a constant reminder that complex systems can be fragile and that we always need to keep improving safety practices.
We started this deep dive with a story of unimaginable loss, but I'm glad we're ending it with progress and hope. The legacy of Tenerife lives on in the safer skies we have today.
While we can't change the past, we can honor those who were lost by embracing a culture of safety and constantly looking for ways to improve our systems and processes, not just in aviation, but in all areas of our lives.
That's a powerful message to take away from this deep dive. Thank you for guiding us through this complex and important story.
It was my pleasure. Let's all learn from the past to build a safer future for everyone.